One of the most debated topics in the RV community is whether or not you should drive with your propane tanks open. But we're not getting into that debate today. Instead, I want to do a test today to see if you even need to power your fridge while traveling from one destination to the next. So let's back up for a second. You own an RV, so you need to keep the food in your fridge cold while you're traveling. Most of us have two options to power our fridge. One is to connect to AC power, and the other option is propane. And this is where that debate starts. You have a house on wheels traveling down the highway at 65 miles an hour. If something becomes dislodged or a fitting becomes loose, now you have a flammable gas inside your RV around electrical equipment that could potentially light that gas. And some states will not allow you to drive through certain areas like tunnels with propane tanks open. Refrigerators have similar insulation properties to coolers, so what I'm going to do today is fill the fridge and the freezer up with food, get everything to the normal operating temperature, and then we're going to turn everything off. We're going to take temperature readings every 30 minutes for 6 hours using an AccuRite temperature monitor. This monitor communicates with a wireless sensor. We have one in the freezer and one in the fridge, so we don't have to open the doors to take the reading. The reason I chose the length of 6 hours is because there's this commonly known rule of 3 among the RV community, which basically states to, number 1, arrive at your destination by 3 p.m. Number 2, stay no less than 3 days. And the third rule, which applies to our test today, is to drive no more than 300 miles in one day. So 300 miles will take approximately 5 hours at 60 miles an hour, but you're probably going to have to stop for gas, so we're going to add another hour onto the test. Full disclaimer, there's a lot of factors that will affect the fridge's ability to maintain its temperature. These are things like the size of your fridge, the airflow around the RV while you're traveling, the overall efficiency, build quality. The outside temperature will also affect how efficient your refrigerator is currently operating. But I think by the end of the video, we'll have at least a good idea of how your refrigerator will hold temperatures over a 6-hour period of time. Now, the RV is going to be parked the entire time, but I will keep my interior temperature at 70 degrees throughout the entire test. Okay, the fridge has been on for over 24 hours and it's packed with food. The temperature inside the RV is still at 70 degrees. I'm gonna power off the fridge and I'll be back in 6 hours with the results.
6 hours later.
Okay, I have the results. Some pretty interesting information here, and we'll talk about this in just a second. I want to be very clear, I'm not trying to tell people whether they should or shouldn't travel with the propane tanks open. This test is just to show if the food in your fridge will stay cold while you're traveling with the power off. First, I want to give you guys the results of a community poll that we took before releasing this video. It basically asks, do you turn your fridge on using propane while you're traveling? Number 1, obviously yes, and that came in with about 37% of the votes. Option number 2, which was no, and that came in at 48% of the votes. We also put up a third answer option, which was yes, I turn the propane on, but I don't like doing it. And that came in at around 15%. Now, I'm in Pennsylvania, but this test done in the Texas summer is definitely going to produce different results. However, I do encourage everybody to do their own test and come back and let us know in the comments section below what you found. Now, a factor I did not mention at the beginning of this video is thermal mass. So if you pack a cooler with 3 bags of ice versus 1 bag of ice, that cooler is going to stay colder longer, and the same principle applies here. I'd rather the results of this test to show accurate readings of what you may see with a fridge about half full. The reasoning is pretty simple. If you pack your fridge to the gills full of food, you're actually going to get better results. There's also one more critically important factor that I want to cover at the very end of the video, but for now, let's get into the results. All right, so let's start with the freezer first. We started at negative 3.9 degrees, and by the end of the test, the freezer was at 18.5 degrees. A couple things to point out: the rise in temperature was relatively higher at the beginning of the test when we turned all the power off. After that initial drop, the freezer seemed to hold the interior temperature pretty well. We did see an overall temperature drop of 22.4 degrees, but after 6 hours with minimal thermal mass, we're still at a freezing temperature below 32 degrees. So they are definitely not insulated as well as these new high-end coolers are that have been getting popular over the last couple of years, but it's still a freezing temperature after 6 hours. Something else worth mentioning, I did not use any freezer packs or ice cubes. I wanted the test to be more on the side of worst case scenario. So if you want your freezer to stay colder than it did in this test, just pack it with freezer packs or Ziploc bags full of ice cubes, or just pack your freezer full of frozen food. That's gonna do the same thing. So let's jump over to the fridge, which I think most people are interested in. But first, before we get to that, if you're enjoying the video, please hit that like button down below. And if you haven't already, we hope you consider subscribing. Okay, at the fridge, we saw very similar results as we did with the freezer when turning the power off. The highest temperature changes were right at the beginning of the test. As time went on, the temperature did rise as expected, but not as much at the beginning of the test. We saw a 3.8 degree rise within the first hour and a half and only a 3.7 degree rise for the remainder of the test. We started at 31.5 degrees, which I know some of you may be wondering, why is my refrigerator so low? Honestly, my fridge is always run cold. It's something I'll never complain about. I usually keep it on setting number 4, but I did put it on 5 at the beginning of this test to get the fridge to the temperature so we can begin the test. Anyway, back to the test, we did see an overall temperature rise of 7.5 degrees, and the temperature was 39 degrees at the end of our test. I was really surprised in a good way by these results, especially considering I keep the refrigerator temperature in my house at 37 degrees. I think it's also important to understand this is a 6-hour test. Where we go camping is anywhere from an hour and a half to a 4-hour drive, and I have to imagine that not everybody is driving 6 hours to their campground. So don't focus on the end temperature if that's really not how long you're driving. And then one more factor I want to mention that I thought about after recording the beginning of this video: if you stop during your travels to get lunch and you open the fridge, that's obviously going to affect your temperature. Also, in regards to that community poll I talked about earlier, we did get a lot of comments about inverters and people having 12-volt fridges. They are becoming more popular. You're going to see them in refrigerators more from the factory, but the reality is the majority of RVs on the road right now do not have 12-volt fridges. Most of them are absorption fridges, and that's why we did this test. Now, the last thing I want to talk about today is something that's pretty important. It's almost common sense, but it is worth mentioning. For all of this to matter and for all of this to work, it is important that you power your fridge before a trip and get it to normal operating temperature before you turn everything off. On absorption refrigerators, that can take up to 24 hours, in some cases even longer, and you need your RV to be level. In absorption refrigerators, ammonia travels through evaporators. That process is dependent on gravity, and if your trailer's not level, that process can be disrupted. It can overheat the boilers, and it could damage your refrigerator. Make sure you level your RV and pack and turn on your fridge a full 24 hours before your trip. And depending on how far you're traveling, you will most likely not have to turn the propane on while you're driving. We've done the test. Your food will be fine. Thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you soon.